Welcome to this Signs of Safety Partner Briefing. My name is David Carter and I'm a Signs of Safety Practice Development Officer in Cumbria County Council. The vision in Cumbria is that we believe the best place for children and young people to grow up is with their own families and networks where they have the potential to care for them safely, and when that's not possible, we're going to provide secure and stable home environment and help them achieve their full potential. So we hope to achieve this, or we aim to achieve this, through focusing our resources on the most vulnerable children, giving the right care at the right time, supporting the communities to thrive, really focusing on prevention and early intervention in terms of cases escalating, and managing demands on the services. What was quite good for us in Cumbria as a measure of the success of the implementation was some feedback we received from Ofsted when they carried out an inspection in August 2019. What they'd said was that the local authorities' preferred model of social work was well embedded. They were referring to the Signs of Safety practice approach here. What they'd seen is that they could see it from the front door right the way through the whole service, and it was evident at every level, from the strategic to the operational. And it was helping the way that social workers think and practice, the kind of language they use, how they process information. They were talking about that cultural shift that we're trying to achieve in Cumbria, about how we approach work, how we communicate with children and families, and sort of highlighting that it was sharing a common language. One of the main values of Signs of Safety and the purpose of it is we all share a same practice approach and share the same common language when working with children and families, so children and families understand us, understand what we're asking of them, but also we understand one another, that we're all speaking the same language. And they could see that we'd been used to positively engage with children and families and help them sharing the evaluation and risks and concerns about their own children and supporting them to make the changes needed to improve children's outcomes. So that was very much about empowering families to come up with their own solutions in the solution-focused way, which is one of the core practice approaches in terms of Signs of Safety. But very much empowering children and families to come up with solutions about their own planning, about what they can do, what their network can do, what the community can do to help them to keep their children safe. So this is our implementation journey so far in Cumbria. You can see it started back in 2016, where the LSCB endorsed the Signs of Safety approach, and at that point we started the phase 1 training, which was 2-day training, national consultants coming into Cumbria and delivering lots of 2-day training to our social work teams and the social work support teams. Moving into 2017, phase 1 practice leads 5-day training, and what that was people that were leaders within the authority and some partners as well, who were responsible for quality assuring and overseeing and supervising practice in Cumbria. There was a 5-day training where again national consultants came in, and there was some intensive 5-day training to go over all aspects of Signs of Safety practice. We began partner briefings at that point, which was the live version of what we're doing today. So we've done lots of briefings across Cumbria, and that's really kind of bringing partners up to speed on the changes that's happening in the authority and what they can expect to see moving forward. There was also an IRO 2-day bespoke training where a national consultant came in and spoke specifically to IROs about how child protection conferences can evolve over time to really incorporate this Signs of Safety practice. 2018 phase 2 training begins, and that was identifying some of the other teams within the authority and again rolling out the 2-day training, but making that much broader to all the other social work teams, to some of the other partners, and really kind of opening that training out. Monthly practice lead coaching started at that point, and that was a national consultant coming in to do bespoke sessions with the leaders, and that was really to kind of refine our practice, or refine our understanding, strengthen our understanding around the Signs of Safety practice approach and all the individual aspects of that. So it was really kind of supporting all of our leaders to really embed their understanding and their learning in terms of this practice. The partner briefings continued through 2018. And at that point, there was an expectation of regular group supervisions in Cumbria. Group supervisions are the main learning platform for all aspects of signs of safety. And what that means is we bring groups of up to 10 people together who share their skills, knowledge, experience and their best thinking in a group supervision format to help us think our way through cases, to help us plan our work, to give suggestions, to give advice around the planning and preparation when we're carrying out work with children and families. 2019, the training continued and there's been a shift to in-house coaching and support. So myself and one of the other practice development officers in Cumbria were signed off by the national consultants to say that we were able to deliver the 2-day training in-house. They come and observed us delivering the 2-day training and was quality assured that it was adequate to deliver ourselves. So we kind of everything coming in-house at this point, and my colleague and I have been delivering 2-day training from that point onward. Appreciative inquiries were starting to become commonplace in Cumbria, and that's really the idea of appreciative inquiries is really to kind of drill down and focus on everything that's gone well in a situation. So if a piece of practice has gone particularly well, we go back and look at why that's gone well and try and understand what was positive about it, what was it that meant that the practice was successful, what was it about that the parents or the carers or the children experienced as so positive. So we really need to think about when we do something well, really kind of understand that and almost celebrate that. And when we really understand why it went well and what the value of that was, we can use that as a model moving forward as we develop this practice in Cumbria. We've had some Cumbria gatherings in each individual area, so in the north and the west and the south, and that was bringing everybody together to celebrate all the good things that's happening with practice in Cumbria. And we've seen some outstanding examples of practice of social workers across the authority at the gatherings. We're moving into collaborative auditing. And the collaborative auditing is really auditing alongside the social worker. So it wouldn't just be supervisors or leaders auditing cases as we've traditionally done. It's working alongside, so we'd have a senior person sitting alongside a social worker, and the social worker will talk that supervisor through the case or that senior through the case, and the person that's overseeing it or carrying out the audit will explain to the social worker what they see, and they'll have a real conversation. There's lots of learning in that because there's lots of dialogue going back and forward. So rather than a supervisor or a senior completing an audit and then giving it to the worker and explaining what they've audited the case as or what they've seen in the case, there's actually a whole dialogue and a whole conversation, lots of learning because it's done alongside the worker. And as mentioned, we had the Ofsted endorsement, which was really positive. So moving on to 2020, the focus is very much on child protection conferences. We've already made small changes in child protection conferences. We still have some way to go, but as you can imagine, on a full-scale implementation, there's lots to think about with all the systems and the processes. But we're moving towards evolving child protection conferences into signs of safety conferences, which will look different. And some of you have already noticed that there's differences in terms of the language, in terms of the plans, in terms of the direct work. But there'll be a common practice or a common way and a common or a reviewed and revised agenda that's going to be delivered in child protection conferences. So children and families always experience those as the same, so there's a consistency in terms of how the child protection conferences are chaired moving forward. A greater consistency in high quality practice. We already have some outstanding practice in Cumbria, we always have, but what we mean by that is greater consistency in terms of the signs of safety practice that we're asking people to carry out, the practice approach that we're asking people to work within. And as I said, we already seen some really high quality practice in Cumbria, but it's bringing those people or those areas that aren't quite as confident, that haven't used it as much, up to a kind of baseline with everybody else. So there's this consistency right the way across the whole authority. We have the bottom lines in Cumbria, and this is about how we do in practice, and this is the rules or the absolutes, if you like, that must be evident as we're working through cases. So it's saying what's expected of workers in practice, what if I was auditing the case, what I would expect to see, what I would hope to see when I looked at a case file, that kind of displays all this fantastic work that's happening that the social workers are doing in Cumbria. And thinking about what the evidence is telling us, signs of safety is grown from the bottom up. What that means is the whole model internationally is developed by workers telling us what is good practice, by having interviews with parents, carers and children about them telling us what's good practice. And we use this as evidence so it helps us develop the model over time. It's not a top-down approach where our leaders or our seniors are telling us we must work in this way, and then that's just the way it is. What it's in fact is going down to the ground, to the people that are actually on the ground, having the conversations, doing the work, and the people that are on the receiving end of that support, on the receiving end of that work, what's their experience. And this is how we learn, and this is how we learn that the model needs to develop from the bottom up, not the top down. And we've adopted the signs of safety approach because we know that it's better outcomes for children if we have better communication with children and families, if we're able to engage with them on their level, if they clearly understand what our concerns are, what our worries are, and we support them to verbalise their experience of these worries. And then that voice, the voice of the child, is used to inform planning in the true sense of the word. So actually the child's voice is centred to that planning. Then we know that we achieve better outcomes for children, because it is a child-centred culture. And what we're seeing is long-lasting positive changes for families, because families take ownership and are managing their own safety plans. There's more chance of success, because the planning and the ideas and the rules for the plan are coming from the families and coming from the network. They're taking ownership and they're driving this plan. So in terms of sustainability, there's much more chance of a long-lasting positive changes for families. We want to see, as mentioned in the previous slide, consistent practice approach for all workers. We all have different skills, different experiences, different training. We come from different areas and authorities, but actually in Cumbria we want everybody to be sharing this signs of safety practice methodology and be seeing a culture shift in terms of how people approach work. So moving away from a paternalistic approach to social work, very much placing children and families in the centre, and for them to determine what their plan looks like and to determine how they're going to achieve safety within their family and the networks. And we know that it does improve job satisfaction and retention of staff. What we mean by this is when we've interviewed workers using an appreciative inquiry format, what they're telling us is statements such as, this is the reason why I got into social work. It's reinvigorating people. People like the way that we communicate with children and families using this model. They like some of the tools, they like some of the experiences they've had in terms of the positive outcomes. But overall, what people are saying is when they fully apply this model, when working with children and families, it gives them great job satisfaction. Now, there's a bit of a transition between the old and the new at the moment. We're trying to move away from the paternalistic approach to social work and move much more into this solution-focused way of working. So there's a little bit about letting go of the old and bringing in the new. However, at this moment in time, we've seen some excellent examples of how people have really embraced signs of safety and are really taken a strong belief in this model moving forward when working with children and families. So an overview of signs of safety is the goal is always child safety. And we have a robust assessment identifying strengths based with clear statements of risk. So signs of safety is a strengths-based approach, but it's not a pure strengths-based approach. We still do talk about the difficult stuff. We still do have very clear, explicit statements about what our worries are and what the risk is. However, we do talk lots about strengths. It's much more balanced in terms of the assessment. We're trying to focus away from professionally imposed service-led plans to more family-led safety plans, as mentioned. So we're thinking about moving through the mapping, for example, when we move into what needs to happen. That's very much a question for the family and the network. We're asking them what solutions do they have, and what ideas do they have in terms of establishing safety within their own family. It's a simple use of language to increase understanding and engagement. So we're getting rid of all complicated language that doesn't really mean anything to anybody, because children and families tell us that they don't understand what we're asking them to do. And a lot of that is around the language that we use, but sometimes we don't understand one another because people come from different backgrounds or different areas and use different abbreviations or different terminologies, and sometimes we as professionals don't completely understand one another. So it's breaking that down and really using clear, accessible language so that everybody understands our worries and everybody understands what we're asking one another to do. It can be applied in all settings as a solution-focused approach to promote change. Signs of safety was originally developed for child protection. However, over time, thinking about that development in terms of it coming from the ground up, what workers were telling us, what services were telling us, but it didn't necessarily fit into their area of practice, which wasn't child protection. So over a period of time, the model has developed and grown. So what we're now saying is actually, based on the language that we use, it can fit in any given situation or any given service. If we have a desired an assessed need and a desired outcome, signs of safety will fit. We can work through the exact same practice approach when working with any service. We're just adjusting some of the language to fit that service and to suit that audience. Relationships are everything. It's a relational model. It is a therapeutic approach, and it is about forming relationships with children and families, meaningful working relationships with children and families, but also about our relationships with one another. And primarily, and always focusing on placing the child and the family at the centre of those relationships. So the focus is always on the child, and it's drawing our attention back to that at times, because different services can have different agendas or different needs in terms of their own individual service, and what success looks like for them and what their outcomes might be. But it's really focusing everyone back onto the child's at the centre of that, and ultimately the outcomes that that need to be achieved are primarily around meeting the needs of the children and the families. Practicing a stance of humility about what we think we know, because we all think we know things about families sometimes based on the possibly a small piece of information we have, and then applying a hypothesis based on our training and our skills and knowledge. However, we have to admit that sometimes when we might be wrong, and that families don't fit nice and neatly into boxes based on some theories that we have or some training that we've had. We need to be admitting sometimes when actually we might have got things wrong. And I know Eileen Monroe's spoken about this in her reports, when she very clearly said actually sometimes we have to admit that we might not be right about a situation and be prepared to take on other information and reevaluate our position in our assessments. It's practicing a skillful use of authority, and what that means is, although it is a strengths-based approach, and we're going to be talking about lots of positive things and really celebrating and honouring families for all the things that they're doing well, but there will be times that we have to have those difficult conversations. So we have to take quite a firm stance sometimes, particularly where there's safeguarding issues. So although we're talking about lots of positive things and good things that's happened with the family, we need to exercise that stance of authority sometimes, where we need to be kind of very clear and direct about what our worries are and what we need to see or what we expect to see to be no longer worried. It recognises all families have signs of safety, bar none. Every family is doing something positive. It's sometimes difficult to see that sometimes, and the reason for that may be that there are very few positive things happening at that moment in time, particularly for families in crisis, and that's the very reason that they've come to the service in the first place, where they're seeking support. However, it may be that we're not approaching work with that mindset for looking for the positive things. We might be approaching it with a deficit mindset, where we're looking at all the things that are wrong and really talking about and focusing on all those difficult things or all the things that we're worried about. Actually, we have to challenge ourselves to think that or to think in the context of every family has some signs of safety or something that's going well, something that we can build upon, because the whole idea of signs of safety is not really focusing on the negatives but focusing on the positives and improving and increasing a consistency in terms of those positive behaviours. We always maintain a belief in change, because change is possible in every scenario in some way. We maintain this belief in change and maintain the belief that change doesn't always happen in our time. It will happen in the time of the children and families. As long as we can ensure safety in spite of the worries that we have to understand or we have to acknowledge that change might happen more in the family's time rather than our own. But as long as we can establish safety throughout the duration of this change, then this is okay. Always search for detail and focus on creating small change. The more the changes, the smaller the changes need to be. If we go in and assess everything that we're worried about and then try and ask the family or try and promote that all these changes happen at once at the same time, we know that that doesn't work. So what we do say is the more changes that need to take place, the smaller those steps will be in terms of resolving some of the worries that we have. And we're always focusing on goals. What Andrew Turnell says is it's a long day on the golf course when you don't know where the hole is. The reason he's give this statement is because back when Signs of Safety was developed, families were saying that they didn't know what they wanted us to do. And we asked ourselves, well, what does success look like? What am I working towards? What will it look like when I'm no longer worried? But what he was using that as using an analogy of a golf course, he was in terms of planning. If people aren't sure what the goal is of a plan, then actually people aren't really sure what they're working towards. And it's the idea of hitting this golf ball on a golf course and not understanding where the hole is, and then we give the club to someone else and they start whacking a ball and they don't know where the hole is. And actually we need to establish, what does the hole look like? What does the goal look like? What does success look like? What will it look like when we're no longer worried? Because that gives us a clear picture of what we're working towards, but it also creates a clear vision of hope for children and families, so they understand what they're working towards, they understand what it'll look like when we're no longer worried. So a brief history of Signs of Safety. Andrew Turnell is a brief solution focused therapist from Western Australia, and he co-developed the approach with Steve Edwards, who is a social worker in Western Australia and a child protection supervisor. And what they did was develop this with 150 frontline social workers from across Western Australia, because they'd had a conversation around the application of solution-focused therapy within social work practice. Because at that time they were having very similar conversations to what we're having now, in terms of we're seeing lots of families coming back to the service, we have lots of worries and they don't often always get fully resolved, or families don't seem to understand what we're asking of them. But what Andrew Turnell was saying, or what he was working in the model of, was this brief solution focused therapeutic model, which is an evidence-based models which they knew, or we know, that can move people from a place, for want of a better word, a place of being broken to a place of healing quite quickly. And it was about building relationships, because it's a therapeutic model. It's about building relationships, strong working relationships with the clients or the people that they were working with. And what Steve Edwards and Andrew Turnell discussed was actually to see whether they could apply that in social work practice to counter some of this paternalistic approach that children and families were telling us that they were experiencing. So they sent 150 frontline practitioners out across Western Australia to practice this solution-focused therapeutic communication and therapeutic approach when working with children and families. And what families were telling us at that time is that it was working for them. It came on the back of the Stolen generation, which, as we know, was manufactured by the local authority, the removal of lots of Aboriginal children purely because of their Aboriginal heritage. So they had to do something really real in terms of re-establishing relationships with these Aboriginal communities. And what the families were telling us was they understood what we were asking with them, because we were using clear, accessible language. They understood what it would look like for us to no longer be involved. They experienced that we're working alongside their families and their communities, and it didn't feel like this paternalistic approach where we're wagging our finger and telling them what to do. Because as social workers in practice, we sometimes forget how families or communities might perceive us based on this whole local authority we have standing behind us and the powers that we do have, because this can leave people feeling quite frightened and quite vulnerable. So it was acknowledging that actually we need to really get down and work on a level with people, with families and communities, and really empower them to come up with their own solutions. So rather than telling them what to do, we're asking them what they think they could do, or what they could bring to the table in terms of ensuring safety. So it was very much shifting that power imbalance. Over the past 20 years, it's been constantly evolving, the Signs of Safety approach. And what I said was that's based on what workers are telling us is good practice, what families are telling us is good practice. It's about reviewing the people's experiences and reviewing the successes, and this informs the development of the model over time. And it's internationally recognised as a leading approach to child protection casework. There are other restorative type approaches around, but certainly within the UK, Signs of Safety is becoming more and more common practice on a month-by-month basis. So in Cumbria, when we began using Signs of Safety, there were much lesser authorities, for example, in the north of England that were using signs of safety. However, the northern group for signs of safety now has grown and grown and grown because more local authorities are coming on board with this practice approach. And what this is about is authorities saying what we're doing isn't working, what we're doing isn't achieving the outcomes that we'd hope for always. We need to be thinking differently. We need to challenge ourselves to work differently with children and families. So this is why more and more people are coming online with signs of safety or other restorative type approaches, which is focusing on a solution-focused practice methodology and relational social work. So this isn't another flash in the pan training, or it isn't another flash in the pan the latest thing that we're doing in social work. It's not the same practice but called something different. We have been in a bit of a transitional phase in Cumbria because we're comfortable in our comfort zones. We're comfortable doing what we've always done. We feel safe there, and what we've been trying to do is possibly do the same thing but call it something different. What we're saying is that this isn't the same, it is something completely different. It's how we think about working with children and families. It's about how we approach the work with children and families. It's about the type of communications we have with children and families, the relationships with families, with one another. It's a real culture shift, and we know that culture shift takes time. There's been lots of training, there's development and coaching and leading within Cumbria, but we know that there's a crossover point where we're moving away from the old and coming into the new. And I think it's fair to say we're now at a stage in Cumbria where people are really stepping away from the old, and we're seeing this as more common practice, this signs of safety practice methodology, when we're looking through case files. But it's certainly not the same practice and called something different. It's different practice and it's called something different. We're really challenging the way we work with children and families. So this is a safety planning roadmap, and this outlines how we work cases as a moving through the service in a child protection context, using signs of safety and applying signs of safety practice. And it's moving from the danger statement to the safety goal. You can see there in the left hand what column. It's moving from our starting point, which will be the danger statement, which outlines who's worried, what they're worried about, and why they're worried about that, moving towards the safety goal, to what success will look like, that vision of what it will look like when we're no longer worried. And you can see there in the center that there's 12 steps, and that kind of navigates us through this process. And then there on the right you'll see all the tools and techniques that we use to communicate with children, to communicate with parents and carers, and to support with the safety planning as we move through this process from the danger statement to the safety goal. Genograms are a bottom line in Cumbria, and they must be done with all families subject to a child and family assessment, and they must be taken to an ICPC. Remember what we said about signs of safety being having the bottom lines, and a network being one of those bottom lines. We need to start talking about who's in the family and who's in the network at the earliest opportunity. And we're not just talking about blood relatives, we're talking about friendships, we're talking about friends in the community, people in universal services, people in clubs, people at schools, whoever's important to that family. We're thinking much further afield than just direct blood relatives, because we know when working with children and families, sometimes those immediate relationships are quite fragmented or quite difficult, and actually some of the people best placed to support with safety planning might not necessarily be blood relatives. It might be friends, it might be people in the wider network. But completing the genogram with the family introduces the importance of identifying the networks, because it's critical in the safety planning as mentioned. And there's a co-production of the genogram or the family map, because it places families as the experts of their own situation, and like an eco map, it talks about the quality of these relationships as well. Sometimes where there are challenges with relationships, sometimes relationships are fragmented, sometimes relationships are really strong, but we start talking about the quality of these relationships, and children and families are experts in these because they live these relationships on a day-to-day basis. And then the significant people to the parents and children should be included if they can offer something to help keep the children safe. So sometimes it's around re-establishing some distant network members, or trying to strengthen some difficult relationships within families and networks, because these are the people that will be able to hopefully offer something in terms of the safety planning, in terms of the support of the parents, in terms of the support of the children, whether that's practical support, taking to appointments or helping with shopping or something, for example, or whether it's safety and protection in terms of direct care of that child. So moving on to mapping, this is how we gather our information in signs of safety and start to analyse that. We jump straight into analysis and try to understand what the behaviours mean and the information means that we're mapping. So we use initial mappings at the hub, and we use mapping in the social work teams when we're having meetings, in supervision, when we're talking to our colleagues, when we're talking to other professionals. It's really drawing all that information together into the 3 columns mapping. And we use lots of mapping with parents and carers and networks and children as well. It's absolutely right to involve them in mapping, because the information that we're talking about, or the information that we're gathering, is about them. Now we can start applying analysis to that, but we need to understand what the parent or the carers or the child's perspective is on that information. So that really lends itself to the analysis about what it actually means. So they should be fully informed or fully invested in the mapping from the onset, because it's information about them, and they're going to have lots and lots of more information that we're not aware of at that point in different perspectives. It's really important in this process. And it's not just listing information into 3 separate columns. It's focusing on the 7 analysis categories, and not just listing what we're worried about, what's working well and what needs to happen, just information. It doesn't mean anything at that point. It's when you apply these 7 analysis categories that it turns into an assessment, that it really gets down to the root causes of some of these behaviour, and then starts offering solutions about how we might overcome some of these behaviours or move past the barriers that we're experiencing. So you can see there, this is the mapping with the past harm, future danger and complicating factors in what we're worried about. And as mentioned, we have existing strengths and safety and protection in the middle column. And then what needs to happen is the safety goals and next steps. And then you'll see at the bottom there, there's the scaling. This is a scaling how far along the continuum we are from the starting point to where we want to be, what we want to achieve, or which will be the end point. And it's asking people to give a number for that, but to also give a rationale for that number. A number is very one-dimensional. When somebody gives a number, it doesn't really tell us anything. It's just a number. We need to start asking really kind of clear, focused questions around the rationale for that number, the reasons why they've scaled at that number, because in reality, people will scale different numbers at different times based on their experience, based on their understanding, based on their role, based on who they are. And that's okay, that's totally expected. However, we need to understand the rationale, the reasoning for that number. So the scaling or the number given is only the start of a conversation. It's the start of a solution-focused conversation around change. So we need to ask some really quite sharp questions around the scale that people give it, or the number that people give it. So thinking about mapping that information onto the when we're completing the signs of safety mapping, we're not there just to gather information. We've spoke about that it's not just 3 columns where we list information. It's much more than that. It's not one-dimensional information that can be open to interpretation. We're moving more into analysis. We're jumping straight into analysis to try and understand what that information means. And most importantly, what that means for the child, what's the impact on the child. That's the very reason we're having the conversation in the first place. So we really need to be clear about that analysis, but also about the impact on the child. Because every statement must have a meaning, a purpose, and state what the impact is. So then we can start thinking about solutions. We can be very clear about what the behaviours are and what the impact is. Then we can start thinking about how we overcome some of those behaviours and support the parents and carers and network in that safety planning. And this is an example of what I might mean by that. So we've all seen statements such as this on assessments or reports. Parents argue a lot in the home. It doesn't really mean anything at this point. It's just a statement. We know that parents argue. It's a natural human condition to argue. People disagree, and sometimes those disagreements can be heated. However, that could be interpreted the wrong way, and we have to think about biases or preconceived ideas or previous cases that we've worked, and we might be thinking or might be in a particular mindset about a particular family. So that could really be interpreted differently by different people. So it's important that we actually develop that statement, because parents argue a lot in the home on its own doesn't mean much. So then we develop it into parents argue a lot in the home and the children are frightened. So this is becoming a bit more two-dimensional now. So we know that parents are arguing in the home and that the children are frightened. It doesn't necessarily say how we know the children are frightened or where the information's come from, but there is a statement there about that the arguing is actually frightening the children. Developing that further into more three-dimensional, we would say that parents argue in the home and the children have said they're frightened. So the children have actually told us that they're frightened. This means that we'll go on to feel worried, confused and nervous living at home, and they will feel unsafe and insecure. So you can see there from that initial statement about parents argue a lot in the home that could be open to interpretation of what that means and what the impact is. We've actually evolved that statement. We're talking about the behaviour, which is the arguing. We're talking about the evidence of their children's experience of that, because they've said they're frightened, but we're also talking about the impact. What that means is how that will affect the children in the present moment, but potentially in the future. So then we create our danger statements, and the danger statement is us laying out the very reasons why we're involved in the first place. It's behaviour specific statements about what we're worried about and the reasons why we're worried, what we're worried may happen if nothing changes. And we try and link it to evidence if we can. So we talk about like the time when, and we try and give real life examples that everyone can understand, and certainly the parents and carers can understand about the worries that we have and what the evidence of that is, what the situations are or the scenarios are that's caused us to be worried. And they're laying out all the fundamental issues that a meaningful safety plan must address. So it's really kind of having a focus on what the specific behaviours are that the safety plan then in turn needs to address moving forward. We try and separate out the concerns if they're more than one. We try to say there's no more than, we do say there's no more than 4 danger statements because it becomes overwhelming and then it becomes a big list of everything that's wrong. We know that there are 4 categories of harm when we're in child protection conferences, so that suggests that there would never been a need to write any more than 4 danger statements, because all the behaviours that we're experiencing, all the behaviours that we're seeing will fit into one of those 4 categories of harm. And really importantly, it's written in a language that the family understands and that they're comfortable with. We're doing away with jargon that doesn't necessarily mean anything. We're doing away with complex phrases and abbreviations and terminology that sometimes confuses us as professionals, and it certainly confuses families. When we speak to families, they often say we're not quite sure what that means, or we're not quite sure what you're asking of us. So it's really writing these in clear, accessible language that everybody can understand. So here we have the structure for a danger statement. It says Mary the social worker is worried about some of the things that have been happening at home that have made Katie and Charlotte feel frightened. There have been times when Mark and Debbie have argued and shouted at one another, and sometimes this has become really serious where Mark has hurt Debbie and they've thrown things at one another. PC Jeffries visited the home on Saturday 12th of May because Mark and Debbie had been arguing. Debbie had thrown a book at Mark and Mark had pushed Debbie's face and scratched her on the jaw. PC Jeffries told us that Katie and Charlotte were hiding in the dining room under the table and crying because they were so frightened. Mary is worried that if Mark and Debbie cannot find a good way to work things out without shouting and hurting one another, then Katie and Charlotte will carry on getting frightened. This will mean that they will feel worried, afraid and unsafe at home. If they feel this way, this can affect their schoolwork, friendships with other people and the relationships they have with people as they grow up. So you can see there in the arrow at the bottom, that's the formula, if you like, for a danger statement. We say who is worried in the red, what behaviours we're worried about in the green, linking it to evidence in the blue, like the time when, and then the most important in the purple is what the impact is on the child. So you can see there that that's written in clear, accessible language that everybody understands. And for those of you who've never seen this statement before, hopefully you can really understand who's worried, what the behaviours are that they're worried about. You understand the evidence of that behaviour when we talk about PC Jeffries and what he'd seen. And then most importantly, you understand what the impact is. So that's a full rounded statement, which we call the danger statements, and that's our starting point. That's the very reason we're involved with the children and the families. So then we have our safety goals, which links directly to the danger statement. For each danger statement we have a safety goal, and it's what you'll be seeing if you were no longer concerned. So it's the possible end game and the possible time frame. It'll describe what will be happening and who would be doing what and for how long. We could try and talk about the time in a safety goal, because we know that if we talked earlier on about shifting goalposts or families switching off if they don't understand where they're going and what that looks like. We try and create the vision of what it will look like when we're no longer worried, and for how long that needs to be maintained in order for us to close a case or to move the case on or step it down, whatever the case may be. We honour progress wherever possible. If something's good, say it's good. Celebrate that that's good. Beware of getting into telling. The safety goal isn't a list of things that we're going to tell the family to do in order to for us to no longer be worried. We're not telling them what they need to do. We're just creating a vision of what it will look like when they've done what they need to do, if that makes sense. And it's not a list of services people must attend or engage with. Safety goals aren't a list of services. We don't measure success through the compliance in services, because we know that parents will sometimes go to a service once, twice, 3 times, but the behaviour hasn't changed. So we don't measure success through the compliance in services, and a safety goal isn't a list of services. It's behavioural specific, so it's more measurable, and it avoids worries around disguised compliance. So there's the safety goal for the danger statement that I'd read in the previous slide. It says, Mary the social worker, Mr Graham the teacher, and Grandma Nancy can see that Mark and Debbie love Katie and Charlotte very much, really want them to be happy girls and want the best for them. In order for everyone to feel less worried about the situation, they would need Mark and Debbie to work on a plan with the people that are close to them, to help Mark and Debbie deal with their feelings and situations that have caused Mark and Debbie to lash out at one another. The plan would need to show that even if Mark and Debbie did get angry, they have good ways of working through their feelings. The plan will show what Mark and Debbie and the network of people will do to stop Katie and Charlotte seeing their mum and dad get angry or hurting one another. This will mean that even at the times Mark and Debbie do feel angry, there is a good plan in place that shows Katie and Charlotte, that stops Katie and Charlotte feeling frightened or crying. This will mean that they feel much happier and safer at home, and will be able to see Mark and Debbie getting along with each other and showing Katie and Charlotte how to work out differences in a good way. Mary would need to see this plan working for a period of 6 months to feel confident that the children are safe and the case can close. So again, there in the arrow you can see there's a formula to writing a safety goal. It's the who's worried in the network, who needs to see the change, describing the behaviours that will have changed, describing the positive impact or how this will improve safety, and then talking about, as mentioned, for how long do we need to see these positive changes being maintained in order for us to feel confident to close the case. You can see there again written in clear, accessible language, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be no arguing. That's again, we try and impose unrealistic expectations. Sometimes people will argue, but it's at those difficult times what the plan will need to show us what will take place in order for Katie and Charlotte to not feel frightened. And then for each danger statement and safety goal, we have a safety scale, and that helps us to measure our distance or a journey travel between the danger statement and the safety goal, or the starting point and the end point. And the safety scale is the network's judgment about the level of safety. It's a measurable tool that helps us to focus our judgment and analyse what we need to do to move up the scale. So when somebody gives us a score, whatever the score may be, then we start asking questions about that score, the rationale for that score. A number on its own doesn't mean anything. It's only the starting point of a conversation. There is no wrong number. Different people will interpret information differently. However, whatever the number is, then we start having solution-focused conversations around what would it take to move one score up the scale. What would a 10 look like? What are the barriers to moving up the scale? Who do you need to help you move up the scale, etc., etc. This helps us to really focus our questions on and our planning on solutions and what people need to help them to move up the scale towards the safety goal. The scaling is easy to interpret due to the numbering, so that the child, the family and the network are able to give their own score on the scale, but this gives us an idea of where they view themselves. As mentioned, there's no wrong scale, and it's quite normal for a parent or a carer to scale differently to us, and that doesn't mean that they're wrong and we're right. It just means that they view the situation differently. But the number that they give us will give us a unique opportunity to really start digging down to the rationale why they scale themselves at that number, and what is it they see that potentially we don't see or that we don't know, or what do we potentially see that they don't see, etc., etc. but it's only ever the starting point of a conversation, the number. So it's the conversation that surrounds the number that's more important than the number itself. Scales are not linked to thresholds. For example, number 1 to 3 doesn't mean child protection conference, numbers 4 to 6 doesn't mean child in need, and so on and so forth. Scaling questions are the number that's given subjective, so we know that parents will scale possibly an 8 sometimes, and that a social worker might score a 2, or a school might score a 4, or the police might score a 1. Whatever the case may be, nobody's wrong. And what that number certainly doesn't mean is there's a particular threshold that's applied. Then it's only ever the starting point of a conversation that opens and unlocks more information based on the skillful use of questioning after the number is given. So the scaling question for the danger statement and safety goal we gave there is on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is that Mark and Debbie and the network have come up with a good plan that shows that Katie and Charlotte are not seeing their mum and dad get angry or hurting one another. And even if they do feel angry, they have good ways of dealing with it, so Katie and Charlotte do not feel frightened at home. And 0 is that there are real worries about Mark and Debbie's arguments at home, and Charlotte and Katie will carry on feeling frightened, worried and unsafe living at home. And there are serious worries about how this is affecting them now and in the future. Where would you scale the situation today? So you can see there that 10 isn't perfect. There's no such thing as perfect, and we need to be realistic in terms of and what can be achieved in terms of a 10. It needs to be good enough, and it needs to be safe enough. We're not expecting people to be perfect, because nobody's perfect, and we know that. We know that the parents potentially will argue again, but the most important thing for us to achieve is, if they do argue, then this doesn't impact on Katie and Charlotte. The family in the network have ways of managing this at those difficult times that shows us that even if they do argue, that Katie and Charlotte won't experience it, witness it, and it won't impact on them in different ways. So putting it into practice, danger statements and safety goals must be discussed and developed with the parents. So we create a draft danger statement which we present to the parent and the carer and the network, and we possibly work through that and change some of the words that are based on the terminology that they use within their family. That's perfectly okay to do that, as long as it doesn't dilute the concerns. We want the parents and the carers to take ownership, so it's only ever draft form until we've discussed it through with the parents or the carers. And parents don't have to agree with them. They only need to understand and take ownership of them. Quite often parents won't agree with us, and that's okay. However, as long as they understand what the worries are and they begin to take ownership of them. They should be considered at every meeting. So every review meeting, we bring out the danger statements and safety goals, because that is our starting point and what the goal is, what the end point is, and then the scale is our measurement of the journey or the progression from the danger statement to the safety goal, and it generates all the conversations in a review context about how far we've travelled or not, and then what the planning needs to be around that. And they shouldn't be revised on an ongoing basis. What that means is that danger statements and safety goals are there, they're set. That's the goalposts of the case, if you like. We shouldn't keep on updating danger statements and safety goals at each review, because we have a starting point and we have something that we're trying to achieve. A danger statement and a safety goal can be dropped, if you like. For example, if for the last 3 reviews the family have scored a 10 on a particular danger statement and safety goal, then why would we carry on discussing that? It seems that safety's been maintained and we can see that there's a plan around that, then we can kind of drop that one. There may be a time, however, if there's some new information comes to light, there's a disclosure or some information that we didn't know, and we're really quite worried about that, and there's evidence that we need to be worried about that, then it may be at that point that we'll create a new danger statement, because that needs to be a focus of our planning moving forward. So moving on to networks, going on the quote, "It takes a village to raise a child." Networks are a bottom line of signs of safety work with families. It isn't our plan, it's the family in the network's plan, which suggests that if it's a family network plan, there needs to be a network around to help them manage this plan. That this network will have roles and responsibilities within the plan. It involves involving the network breaks the secrecy and shame that's typically surrounds child abuse. Some of you may have heard about child abuse being a syndrome of secrecy, and this is where abuse functions in this kind of secret or grey area. It really kind of brings all those worries and all the impact out onto the table. If anybody in that network is involved in the safety and protection of a child, they need to know what all the worries are, and they need to know all the detail. And it's difficult, and there's things around shame and denial and other aspects that we need to work through, but with cleverly crafted questions and building strong relationships, we can work through some of those barriers. But it is very important that we break this secrecy and shame that surrounds child harm. The naturally occurring network are the people that see the children more often, much more regularly than professionals, so they can monitor the effectiveness of the safety plan. When we're doing questions around networking, we can quickly identify those people that will support, that share our worries, and that those people that may not potentially share our worries or support the planning. So we can quickly identify who are the strongest or the most appropriate people within that network to be monitoring the progress of the safety plan and potentially leading the safety plan when the case closes to social care. The Families Network will also be involved long after the statutory agencies are not. And the best hopes for building mutual responsibility for children's safety and ensuring sustainable change. So right back at the start when we spoke about sustainable change, we are seeing this when networks are taking more ownership of their own planning, and the plan comes from them. It's not imposed on them, it's actually come from the parents, carers and network. Then it's much more likely to be sustainable and much more likely to create ongoing and lasting change. Time does need to be invested with parents and carers and networks, all levels of intervention across the service, right the way through early help, preventative services, into social care, with partners, with health. Signs of safety, the practice approach relies on networks. It relies on strengthening family networks in line with Think Family, in line with thriving communities. It's about this systemic thinking. It's about restoring families, restoring communities, etc., etc. We need to be having these type of conversations at the earliest opportunity, because these are the people that can potentially provide sustainable change in the long term. These are the people that the parents and carers and the children are telling us are important to them, so they need to be brought into the planning at the earliest opportunity. We do need to consider the impact of shame, guilt and denial. There's some very powerful emotions that are involved in establishing networks. What Steve DeShazer talks about is that families will often bring forward what people might view as resistances, but what he says is that it's actually unique and a unique opportunity to start discovering or start exploring some of the unique characteristics with the families and some of the challenges with the friendships and stuff. So again, that lends itself to our assessment, because we start understanding some of the family dynamics and some of the thought processes and some of the challenges that they've had in terms of the relationships. And it's very telling, these conversations around family dynamics. If we think about in an eco map, we're talking about the people that are around, not necessarily blood relatives, but friendships, and then start talking about the quality of relationships. And we're going to have some very useful conversations around those quality relationships to help us think about the best people to be in the network. Because parents and carers and children are the experts of the relationships and their experiences of these. We might not agree with these sometimes, however they are the expert of the relationships and how they experience them and how they value these relationships. And network members do not always need to provide direct care of a child. We used to traditionally ask very few questions, but more directed on who can provide direct care of a child. A network member doesn't even need to come into contact with the child. An example of that would be is that mum has a friend that lives 100 miles away, and the children don't ever see this person. However, it's an old school friend, but mum rings this person on a Friday night to let off steam, to kind of share some of her challenges and stresses of the week. That person still has a function in the safety plan, but doesn't necessarily come into contact with a child. If we'd asked a question, who can help you care for the child, that person may have never come up. The value of that person and what support they could provide might have never came up because we've asked the wrong question. So we're asking questions that are a lot broader than that, that's not necessarily about direct care of the child, but that somebody that could provide support or somebody that's meaningful in whatever context. But what if there is no network? There's always a network. Is it our thinking or judgment that's getting in the way of people finding support people? Parents and carers will bring forward at times people that we don't necessarily agree with for different reasons. And that's okay. Because what they are saying is that they do have these people and they're important on a particular level. Surely it makes sense to try and work with these people if the parents and carers are telling us that they're important and they will be around once we're gone. Surely it's more important that we try and work with these people and manage those relationships as part of the safety plan, rather than trying to shut those people out. And when we close the case, these people will still be there anyway. It makes sense, it's common sense to involve these people if we can, and to really kind of challenge ourselves in terms of our judgments and our values around how we might think about particular people based on information we either know or think we know, and some of the bias we might have because of that. Can we support them to build or extend their network? What questions could we ask? Are we asking the right questions even? We mentioned before about really we're not framing a question around direct care of a child all of the time. We're also framing questions around who's meaningful in whatever level or in whatever context. But there are some people that we cannot allow, and we know those people, Schedule 1 offenders, very high risk people that even with a safety plan we're not confident the network could manage the risks associated with that person. Now the conversation doesn't automatically rule that person and stop that person. We're saying absolutely not. We ask lots of questions and help that parent or carer in a therapeutic way, asking lots of questions around why they feel that person would be positive and why they think that person might not be positive, and what would it feel like to a judge or a manager if that person was put forward as a safety person, how they might perceive that. So we ask it in different contexts and different ways, but we do need to manage it with open discussion. So thinking about past questions, we ask questions about the past, the present, the future, and then if parents or carers say they don't have anyone. And you can see all these questions here, they're not asking around direct care of a child, they're asking around events in lives or situations in lives when people have been important to that person. We're trying to identify who the important people are before we can start bringing them into the network and start sort of promoting roles and responsibilities, if you like, with the safety plan. We're just at this point trying to find out who the people are. You think about people from the past. If you think about the life course of a person from birth to death, or birth to present day, they've met literally hundreds of people. There's been literally hundreds of people that have impacted them in some way, shape or form throughout their life. Now this is very broad thinking, but the reality is that people have lived in a number of different addresses, they've been to different schools, they've had different friendships, lived in different areas, on different social networking platforms, in different clubs, different people in the community with different community provisions in universal services. If we actually map out everybody that's had an impact or a relationship with the parent or the carer or the child at different points in their life, it's actually overwhelming the amount of people that families and parents and carers and children are connected to. It's an eye-opener. Clearly we can't speak to hundreds of people, but we're starting broader and then narrowing it down and condensing it down to the people that are key, who could potentially provide safety and care and support, whether it be practical or emotional, whatever the case may be, but really identifying who those people could be that could be brought into this network. And signs of safety is a questioning approach, not an expert approach. What that means is we don't use the same theory and the same process and the same action with each individual family that we work with. We understand that through a questioning approach we're asking lots and lots of questions over time to help unlock our understanding of the family, but help them to unlock their understanding about themselves, if that makes sense, using these therapeutic solution focused type questioning, because we aren't experts on people that we don't know. We can perform a hypothesis, or we may have bias based on what we've read about a family. However, we don't know that family until we've started asking them questions in any way, shape or form, because every family is different, every family is unique. So this isn't an expert approach where we impose our views based on the training we have and our expert opinion. It's more of a questioning approach. We're asking lots and lots of therapeutic type questions to help families to unlock their own potential, to help them to understand themselves better, to develop a better relationship with themselves, and for help us to understand the family in its entirety rather than what we think we know about them. And we use EARS in signs of safety as a method of questioning, if you like. You'll see there the E is the elicit, which is asking the question. The amplification is asking lots of behavioural detail about that question. The reflection is what that means. So we've asked the question, we know all the behavioural detail, the who, what, where and when, and then we start reflecting and applying analysis, what that means, that behaviour, what does it mean for the family, what does it mean for the parents, carers, children, network, etc. And then we start over. We can ask a different question on the same subject or a different question on a different subject, whatever the case may be. They aren't rigid, these questions, and they're not a script that you use. You design unique questions for the unique set of circumstances for each family that we're working with. So actually there's a lot about preparation and designing the right questions in signs of safety. And you'll see there, and I shan't read these all out, but there's a table there that shows this elicit, amplification, reflection and starting over, the process that we can work through when we're talking about worries, the process when we're talking about strengths, and then the process when we're talking about goals. You can use this EARS process, questioning in any form really. So when we're mapping and when we're having conversations with parents or with children, we can have when we're conversations with one another. This process is really useful, so we're not just asking a question and getting an answer and then forming a hypothesis or a judgment based on that. What we're doing is asking a question and then finding out lots and lots of detail about that to give the full broadest picture. Then we're reflecting to understand what it means and start applying analysis, and then we're starting over again. So there's a cycle to asking these questions, and these questions, as mentioned, take place over time. The questioning and the assessment isn't an event that happens in the beginning. We continue asking questions over time. And we use solution-focused questions, so we use a lot of relationship questions in signs of safety. Andrew Sennell talks about relationships being 70% of the questions we ask in signs of safety, because it allows us to see the situation from another person's perspective. Exception questions are very important. This is focusing on when the times when we could have been worried, or the times when the problem was present but we weren't because of what happened or what the parents did or what they didn't do. So there's exceptions to the worries, if that makes sense, because that can unlock some of our understanding about how we can safety plan if we know what the exceptions are and we can replicate that in the future. Impact questions is what they say. It's about the impact, tells us the impact of a situation. And coping questions are really important, thinking about those parents and carers that are really struggling, that things have been really difficult and challenging for them, and it's helping them to understand about times when they have coped in the past and what was that about, who was there to help them, how did they help them cope. Miracle questions is about what good enough will look like. Goal formulation questions is about helping the client or the person that we're working with think about their goal in relation to the worries. What's their personal goal? What's the goals for the families? What's the goal for a week's time? What's the goal for 3 weeks' time? A year's time? Whatever the case may be. But it's always working towards something, because if we're not working towards something, if we're not working towards a goal, we're not working towards anything. We're static. Scaling questions. Scaling questions gives an individual interpretation of the worries and promotes conversations around change, and we've discussed scaling questions already, but this is us measuring how far along we are in the journey or how far along we are in the scenario, whatever the case may be. So there's some examples there, and I shan't read them all, but it gives you an idea of the type of questions we might ask. So as mentioned before, the questions that we're using on here, for example, aren't a script. When we are working with children and families, we start to understand what the worries are and what the concerns are, then we start designing unique questions for the unique set of circumstances of that family. So families won't always experience the same questions as perhaps their friend's family has it, for example. Everybody's asked different questions. It's unique, it's therapeutic, it's very dynamic. It's not a static event, and we're certainly not reading scripts out each time. We're designing unique questions for the unique circumstances for each family. And thinking about the relationship question there, this was a presentation that was at the Science and Safety Gathering, and what this shows is a Zen garden. And the reason we use a lot of relationship questions, where once upon a time we might have been dismissive of maybe somebody else's opinion or view, because we would say things like, well, it's just an opinion or it's a view, there's no evidence, and we kind of dismiss it. But what we're saying is now, no, we want everybody's view, we want everybody's experience, because we know that different people see different things at different points in time. So my experience of a situation will be very different to my neighbour's experience of that very same situation, and their experience will be very different to but I don't know, their uncle's or their daughter's experience of that situation. Within that network of people that are close to one another, everyone will have seen or heard or experienced different things, and it will mean different things to different people. So surely that suggests that the more of these relationship questions that we ask, the more of a truer picture and the different dynamics and contexts we can understand in relation to these worries that we have. So moving on to direct work with children, Andrew Turnell says that children often feel like pawns in people's games. And what he means by that is that traditionally in social work practice there was all these things going on around children, but they didn't ultimately understand what was going on or who these people were, what the purpose of it was. And this can be very anxiety provoking for children. It must be quite difficult for them, for all these strange adults to be in and out of the house, and all these different meetings and possibly even court scenarios, etc., and legal people speaking to them. It must be quite anxiety provoking for children. So what he's suggesting is that there's a way we need to be ensuring that we're communicating with children in a way that they thoroughly understand who we are, what we're worried about, what the situation is, and what's going to happen. So it's creating a bit of a vision for them in terms of what will happen in their future. So this alleviates some of this anxiety and alleviates some of this misunderstanding. And My Three Houses is the main tool, if you like, within Science and Safety to record a child's voice, because the child's voice is critical in casework. The child's voice should be visible to the parents, the carers and the network, because it informs all our planning and should in fact lead all the planning. The child's voice is key, is central to all of our planning. The My Three Houses is a recording tool. It's the conversation that counts. We can do My Three chocolate bars, My Three helicopters, whatever the case may be. The method of recording isn't as important as the questions that we're asking and the preparation in terms of completing that work. So if we go out with a piece of paper with My Three Houses and then start asking the child what they're worried about and what they think's good and what they think's not good, etc., etc., we're potentially not going to get the right answers. We need to be really thinking about what the specific worries are in relation to the danger statements and thinking about the safety goal and starting designing questions around that, unique questions for each individual child or young person. And as an example here of three houses, the house of good things for this little girl was they like giving mum and dad cuddles when they come home from work. They like it when dad gives them sweets. They like mum and dad. They like it with Christmas and getting presents from mum and dad and me. This child's happy when Sarah gets smacked for talking in bed because they don't get smacked. So there's a bit of a disclosure there, but in a child's mind this is a good thing because their sister gets smacked instead of them. So in a child's mind you can understand how that would be a good thing for them, but actually there's a bit of a disclosure there in the house of good things. I like it when my mum and dad tickles me. I like washing plates. I like eating apples and tomatoes. I like having parties at my house. I like eating sweets from party bags. I like this swimming in my bath, I think the last one is. But that's very telling that, as I said, there's a bit of a disclosure there, but from the child's perspective, it is a good thing that her sister's getting smacked and she's not, and actually the situational scenario here is a physical harm case. Their house of worries is they miss mum and dad and it makes them sad. When this child doesn't eat their food, they get smacked by mum and dad. Dad frightens me. When I don't swallow my food, dad smacks me. Mum and dad smack me with a cane on my bum, hands and heels and it makes me cross. So there we couldn't be any clearer about what the child's world feels like to them, what their experience is. And that hasn't come around by the worker going out and simply asking the child what they're worried about. We can't expect children to have the sophistication of language and the sophistication of communication skills to be able to verbalise exactly how they're feeling and what that means for them and have this level of self-awareness. The workers quite skillfully designed lots of very specific questions to talk to the child in a therapeutic way, to really focus on their experience and ask lots of questions designed to elicit this information. The House of Dreams is the wish for Christmas and presents and trees, the wish to be with mum and dad, and the wish for mum and dad to hug me. I wish for mum and dad to stop smacking me. I would like them to be asked to stop smacking me. So you can see there, they're very clear about what they want. They want to be with the mum and dad. This child clearly loves the mum and dad and cares about them, because there is stuff throughout these around emotional warmth and cuddles and tickles and that kind of thing. And then on there it says about they want mum and dad to hug her. But right at the end there they say the wish for mum and dad to stop smacking me, and I would like them to be asked to stop smacking me. In the child's mind, that's simple. I don't like you smacking me, stop smacking me. And that there's almost wrote the safety plan for itself, because then we go back to the parents and the carers at this point, say this is your child's world and their experience, and this is what they want in its simplest form. So then we need to start planning about how can we go around doing that, what are we going to do to ensure that this doesn't happen again. The safety house is a tool again that we complete with children and young people. And possibly thinking about in the context of the young girl in the previous slide, we might complete this safety house, and this is them verbalising about what it would look like in their house if they were happy and they felt safe, and they had the rules that were in place that made them feel safe and secure at home. So you can see there in the rules of the safety house in the roof. So what are going to be the rules in your safety house, the do's and the don'ts. In the middle there, the people who live in the safety house, and we need to be very clear about that. At times, certainly personally, I've worked in different cities where there's households I've gone into and there's never been the same people in that house 2 times that I've visited. It's always different people and very busy households and not really quite sure who lives there and what's happening. We need to be very clear about who is actually living in this house and who should be living in this house. But this is from the child's perspective, so they need to be saying who they feel comfortable with, who they feel safe with that can be living in the house. Then on the outside there, it's on the left, it says people who can come and visit the safety house, people they're comfortable with, people they would appreciate or enjoy a visit from. But then in the red there, people that they don't feel safe with. And that's very important, because parents and carers may feel safe with a particular person, but for whatever reason, the child or young person doesn't feel safe with them, and that is the overriding voice. That is the voice that's dictating or determining what our planning is going to be around. So the parents and carers really need to understand who their children don't feel safe with, what their world looks like, what their experiences feel like. And then you can see there in the path, and we could do this like a scaling, so it's the child's readiness to go home or the readiness to reunify, where 0 is absolutely not ready, and 10 might be at the doorway there, where it said I'm absolutely ready to go home now. And you can start having scaling questions around that. Okay, you scale a 5, why do you score a 5? What would it take to move you to a 6, and so on and so forth. So we can have questions, scaling questions about readiness for reunification when carrying out this tool. And it's a really useful tool to work in that context, but in any context, to be fair, it's about just with children and young people, again capturing their voice in a way where they're explaining what their house would look like in the ideal, how they would feel comfortable and how they would feel safe. And then, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, as a bottom line, we have a words and pictures explanation, and this is the parent's explanation to their child about why we're involved. So you can see there this is a two-way process. So in the middle we have the issues or the worries there. So we have the danger statements and the safety goals and safety scales, so that around the issues and the worries. But you can see there the My 3 Houses is on the left is the child's explanation to their parent, their experience of what it's like living at home, how they feel and what their voices and what their experiences are. And you can see there on the right is the words and pictures is the parent's explanation to the child why we're involved. And it's explaining to the child in child-friendly language that they can access and understand the reasons why these social workers are coming to my home, what it is that they're worried about and what they're working towards, what the future's going to look like in terms of developing planning to keep this child safe and to help them to feel safe. It's a shared story, so we develop it with the parents and other important adults, and the social worker supports them to explain the concerns to the child. If the children are to be involved in safety planning, they need to understand why there is a need for that plan. And it's not okay for parents to say that they don't need to know this information. They do. We don't want to traumatise children, so we say it in child-friendly language. However, children need to understand who these people are that are in their lives, because we don't want children to feel anxious or not understand or take on any kind of ownership about these worries that we have. We need to clearly describe who the people are, what's the purpose of them being there, and what we're hoping to achieve, what we're working towards, so we can alleviate some of these anxieties for children so they can thoroughly understand the reasons why we're involved. It provides a foundation for healing. It's a therapeutic process, and Words and Pictures were developed alongside Signs of Safety with Susie Essex from the NSPCC, who's done some fantastic work, but has offered Words and Pictures as a way to communicate with children and families around some of these difficult issues. Helps the parents in the network process the past by connecting their experience to the problems of the children, what the children need to know. Enables professionals to have a better understanding and greater compassion of the parents' experience. Because sometimes, again, we talked about making judgments, it's helpful for us to really understand from the parents' perspective what their experience has been about some of these challenges, and helps us to have more compassion for that. And it reinforces the relationship between the family and the worker, enabling greater trust and openness to flourish. We're having these very brave, open discussions, very brave conversations with families around the issues. We spoke earlier on about this skillful use of authority. There needs to be time when we need to talk about the tough stuff, and the parents and carers need to be aware of this when we begin to work with them. We say we really celebrate everything that you're doing well and really acknowledge all those difficult times, but you've overcome them successfully. But there will be times when we need to have the difficult conversations and talk about the tough stuff. But that's absolutely right when we're working in a child protection conference, to celebrate the successes, to celebrate the strengths, but really focusing in and have the conversation around the tough stuff when it's necessary. It's designed to deal with the silencing, secrecy and mixed messages and confusion that surrounds child abuse, because it's in a very clear, accessible story. And it's often not telling children why we're worried, saying it's an adult concern. We spoke about this, about actually it's not an adult concern. If something impacts on a child and is their world, then it is their concern because it affects them. So these aren't just adult concerns that we talk about. We're discussing them in child-friendly language, adult themes in child-friendly language that they can understand, they can make sense of their world. Andrew Turnell talks about Words and Pictures being 50% of the safety planning, which it absolutely is, because unless a child understands who we are and what we're worried about and what the impact is and the reasons for that, then how will they know what safety looks like, and how can we start having those conversations around safety, and how will they know what's okay and what's not okay, and how will they understand some of the rules that we're trying to put in place to manage this. So it is 50% of the safety planning, which is why it's a bottom line in Signs of. And as an example here, has been anonymised. This is Words and Pictures explanation. So the context of this was in the south of the county, and the worker had supported the parent and carer explain to their children around the situation that they found themselves in. And because Jenny and Bobby had lived with mum since they were born, Dad sometimes lived with the families and sometimes with the family and sometimes lived in his own house. Mum and Dad loved Jenny and Bobby very much, and they enjoy spending time together. Beatrice, the social worker, had been worried about things at home. Sometimes Jenny and Bobby did not see Dad for a long time. This was because he was in prison. One time they went to live with Uncle Paul and Auntie Claire because Mum went to prison too. Jenny and Bobby missed Mum and Dad when they were away. This must have felt very sad and scary. Prison is a place where grown-ups go when they break an important rule called the law. The law is a rule that tells us how people should and should not behave. It is wrong to break the law, and if the police and the judges and the court find out, people can get into trouble. They might even go to prison for what they've done. One of the reasons Mum and Dad went to prison before was because they took things from shops without paying for them. This is called shoplifting. Shoplifting is wrong, and the people that do it are breaking the law. And you can see there in the picture, there's a picture of the judge making a statement about the law, and then the police officer there waving his fist, telling the parents to stop shoplifting because they're breaking the law. The judge has told Mum that she has to go to prison again because she broke the law. So on the 4th of June 18, Mum will go and see a judge in Barrow Court. No one knows how long Mum might go to prison for, but it might be as long as 2 years. Beatrice, the social worker, will find out if you can visit Mum in prison. You'll be able to write letters to her and she will be able to call you sometimes. Mum loves Jenny and Bobby very much. She will miss them and think about them all the time. And that's very important to get across to children. Despite these difficult circumstances and despite some of the behaviours that are worrying them, the parents love them very much. So it's not about demonising parents, it's helping children or acknowledging with children that the parents do love them very much, and we're all working hard to kind of work through these difficult situations. Mum, Dad, Uncle Paul and Auntie Claire all want Jenny and Bobby to feel safe and happy and settled. They all think it would be best and safest thing for Jenny and Bobby to stay living with Uncle Paul and Auntie Claire while Mum goes to prison and get the help she needs to help her to feel better. So that's around the planning there. So the plan hasn't actually taken place, but this is the start of the plan, and it's helping Jenny and Bobby to understand what's going to happen next. So there's no sort of insecurity or no uncertainty around what will happen in their future. So you can see there with that story, it's very clearly explained all the different situations and really broken down the language and really explained what some of it means in terms of the law, and explaining what the law is and explaining what prison is and who a judge is, etc, etc. But hopefully you can see from that, for those of you that have never read this story before, hopefully you can understand exactly what had happened, exactly what the worries were and exactly what's going to happen. It's written in such a way that's completely accessible for everybody, so everybody understands. And remembering that the context of this is the parents' explanations to their children why we're involved, so they will have been supported to sit down with their own children and read this story out to them. And thinking about safety planning, so we mentioned before that safety planning is a journey between the danger statement and the safety goal. Safety planning, or the safety plan, isn't an event, so we do an assessment, put a plan in place, and that's static. The safety planning is a journey. Once we have the danger statement and safety goal in place, the safety planning is the journey from the danger statement to the safety goal, and then scaling and reviewing that as we move along the journey. And the safety plan sort of talks about who will do what, where and when, how to keep the children safe when the danger or the difficulty is happening. It doesn't necessarily mean that the difficult behaviour won't happen or the danger won't be present, but it's how people respond during these times. That's what a safety plan is. It's rules around managing those difficult situations, because every family bar none has a difficult situation that they have to deal with at some point in their life, some more than others. So it's about during those difficult times, who's going to do what, where and when to help you navigate or move through those difficult situations without it impacting on the children. So science of safety is grounded in solution-focused brief therapy, and that distinguishes itself from more traditional forms of interventions because the change is sought and located in the imagined future. We start working towards a goal, what we need that to look like. So the safety planning is slightly different in that context, using this solution-focused brief therapy to work through the journey from danger statement to safety goal. And the task of solving problems is approached by seeking to move towards what is wanted instead of trying to move away from what is unwanted. So we're walking towards the safety goal. So we're not constantly focusing on the danger statement and the worries. We're moving away from that and focusing on the safety goal and focusing on what success or safety looks like. And then offering support, the practitioner makes that person the expert of their own life, which is right to do, because parents, carers, children, networks are the experts of their own lives. We're there for a moment or a fraction of time. They've lived it day in, day out their whole lives. So it's asking them the right questions to unlock their understanding and unlock solutions from their perspective about what they think a safety plan should look like and what rules they could come up with to help us to feel less worried. And if asking useful questions, the process enables the person to begin moving towards the future they want and to learn from their own existing skills, strategies and ideas about what can be done differently. Parents, carers, children, networks all have their own individual unique set of skills, and sometimes they might not know that. You need to explore that. That's why it's useful to think about exception questions and coping questions and really help parents and carers who might be in really difficult times themselves, which is why they've ended up in this situation, but it's helping them to understand that they do have skills and they do have unique characteristics that will help them and support them in safety planning. So it's really digging down in this solution focused way to help them understand and unlock their potential in terms of safety planning for the future. So thinking about a safety plan, it's a specific set of rules and arrangements that describe how the family will go about their everyday life, that shows everyone that the children will be safe in the future. And that's thinking about the whole day and all the different scenarios and situations that could potentially be triggering or cause red flag worries. So thinking about right the way from waking up in the morning through breakfast times, getting dressed, going to school, coming home from school, clubs, trigger points throughout that, and times when we've been worried about the behaviour and acknowledging what those are and having rules around managing that situation, because there will be difficult situations, will be challenges as we've mentioned. So we have a specific set of rules and arrangements about how that safety plan, how those parents and carers in the network are going to manage those difficult times. And it's what needs to happen for everyone to be satisfied that the child will be safe in their own family. All families bar none have challenges, some more than others. That's human nature, that's just the world that we live in, but it's about how they successfully overcome those challenges with the support of the right people at the right time within their network, who's going to do what, where and when on a daily basis to keep these children safe. And it's a service plan, as mentioned, isn't a safety plan. Services don't keep people safe. An example being if a parent, we know parents that go to a triple P parenting program, for example, but then things don't change, so they go on it again and then again and then again, and nothing changes. And we have lots of reasons or excuses why this hasn't happened, but the reality is that a service doesn't necessarily keep a parent safe. If they're not invested in that change, if they don't have a belief in the value of the change, then they're not invested in it, and they've potentially just been told to go to that course. They don't really understand the value of that, and they don't necessarily even want to be there. If a parent or carer goes to some kind of service because they've solely themselves identified that it might be useful, that they need extra help with that, then they're already invested at that point. And if that behaviour changes or improves or regulates as a result thereof, then actually that has been useful. But what isn't useful is giving a big list of services for families to comply with, and then they comply with them, and then we're still worried and nothing changes. We need to be really focusing on the behavioural aspect, what the changes in behaviour will look like. The parents, carers and network will come up with the solutions about how they're going to achieve that. It is an expectations agreement rebranded, so we've done away with expectations agreements. They don't exist in Cumbria anymore. Because all that was a list of rules that we'd hand to a parent or a carer to sign in the heat of the moment, ask them to sign it, and then it kind of reassures us that everything's going to be okay, but it doesn't, because that's again only a moment in time. And the reality is, if somebody gave me an expectations agreement or a list of rules that I'll comply with and asked me to sign it in a difficult situation when anxieties are high, I would feel quite frustrated about that, and I'd be inclined to not want to do it. And when that person left, I may not completely dismiss what they've asked me to do because I'm not invested in that. This hasn't come from me. Safety planning comes from the family, comes from the network. It's solutions that they've come up with to manage their own situation. It's not what we've imposed on them, because expectations agreement do not equal safety. A safety plan is a journey created in a relationship and demonstrated over time. So it is a journey from the danger statement to the safety goal, and we'll measure and test this over time. There will be some aspects of the safety plan and the rules that the family and the network have come up with that will be hugely successful. It completely alleviates our worries in a particular area, and that's measured and tested over time, and that becomes embedded in the long-term plan. However, there will be rules that they put in place that doesn't quite manage a scenario, and again, that's okay, but that helps us to come back and refocus our efforts and start asking different questions around that and adjusting the rule so it actually evolves and it changes over time. And we test these rules over time, so the ones that have worked really successfully and been measured and tested remain. The ones that don't, we change and revise and review those until they become a rule that actually everyone can work with and does ensure safety that's measured and tested over time. So eventually we'll come up with the final safety plan, and this will be the plan that the family, the parents, carers network and the children will carry forward once the case is close to social care. And the skill for the worker lies in the coaching the family to build safety rather than imposing a to-do list. We've all seen in the past. Remember the how signs of safety came around was around this feeling of this paternalistic approach and us imposing our rules and our views on people, and there's kind of power imbalance. We're very much shifting away from that. So we're not giving families a to-do list and telling them what to do. We're asking them the right therapeutic solution focused questions to unlock their potential, to unlock their understanding, so they start bringing forward and coming up with the solutions. And all safety plans should consider a network, as we'd mentioned, and these are the people that are important to the parents and the children, and what those people will do on a day-to-day basis to ensure safety, to support the parents, to ensure safety, to help the children to feel safe. There'll be an agreement on signs that the parents or the caregivers are struggling and what the network will do in these instances. So we'll talk about triggers and red flags. We talk about situations that trigger behaviours, and we talk about red flags when times when the behaviour is happening. And we need to understand these because the difficult times will come. In the real world, difficult times do come, and we need to manage these as best as we can. So there'll be rules around during these difficult times. This is what this person's going to do to make sure we navigate these difficult times and we come through the other side, and the children haven't been affected and haven't been exposed to any difficult behaviours. There's agreement on people, events and situations that the families and the parents need to avoid. So we're thinking about different situations that could be triggering, different situations that were very difficult to manage, and we maybe need to think about a different solution there. But it's useful in safety plans to think about all of those situations and think about those that potentially happen in the future, because again, they're only there for a moment in time, but we know as children grow older there's going to be other challenges as they grow up, and other thinking about contextual safeguarding and other scenarios and other situations that we may need to kind of have a think about, because if we're talking about a long-term sustainable plan, isn't it right to be talking about these things that could potentially come up in the future, depending on the age and stage of development of the child or young person? There's clear rules and actions which will keep all the things we're worried about from happening tonight. So that's immediate safety. So we talked about services earlier on where we're worried about particular behaviours, so we'll put a referral in. However, a referral may take 4 to 6 weeks to be actioned, to be picked up, if you like. That doesn't ensure safety and protection of that child tonight. So it talks about from the here and now, from this moment forward, what are the rules going to be. We need to get straight into this creating the immediate safety plan, the initial safety plan, but then that's developed and measured and tested over time, and on that journey we kind of measure and test all the rules that the family have put in place, and then that evolves into the finalised safety plan, which will be carried forward once the family are close to social care. If professional services are involved, what exactly is their role and what will it be in enhancing and promoting safety? Parents and carers are able to manage the safety and protection of their children without necessarily putting lots and lots of services in place. We know this. We know we've worked with families before where there's a dozen services, for example, working with them, but we're still worried. But then we know that there's other families with equally as worrying behaviour, but with one service involved, and they're managing that. There's something around how parents and carers are managing their lives and are asking the right questions and what solutions they're coming up with. We don't automatically have to, based on our hypothesis and based on our view, start referring to lots of services. That very much needs to, and as much as possible, needs to come from the parents, the carers and the children and the network. It's not about what support we're imposing on people, it's about what support they think they need and feel they need and they're asking for, that they've identified that they would not like more information or more support or more education in a particular area. So we don't automatically refer to lots of services that don't necessarily equal safety. We start asking questions to the family about what they think is important, what they think they need, because irrespective of services, they can manage safety if the right safety plan is in place and they have a network around them to help them manage that. And remembering, we don't think that safety plans fail, some just aren't rigorous enough yet. Just because the safety plan doesn't work, as previously mentioned, that's okay. It just means that we need to ask different questions, we need to have different rules, we need to test out different rules that the network have come up with. Just because a safety plan hasn't worked after a point, it had been working for a while and it hasn't worked at a particular point, we don't completely abandon it and rip it up and start again, because actually there may still be lots of positive aspects to that safety plan, lots of positive aspects to some of the rules that we have. It may just need adjusting in a particular area, because whenever problems arise, we need to get the parents and the network back together to sharpen their plan. They're responsible for their plan because it's their plan, so we need to get them back around the table. We try and resist imposing all our rules again and putting sanctions in place and escalating, etc, etc. We bring them all back together and sort of have a look at what didn't work, why didn't it work, what could we do differently, what could they do, what could we do, what could the network do, etc, etc. It's supporting them to sharpen their own plan. And always consider if escalation through statutory process is the only option. Again, moving through statutory processes, although it's a legal requirement based on threshold, etc, doesn't necessarily again equal safety, because a plan is a plan is a plan. If a plan's good and it's robust and it has the right rules and the family network are working it, it will work irrespective of what level of the service that it's at. We need to escalate through statutory process if that's the right thing to do, if we have a statutory obligation. However, we need to understand that that won't necessarily improve or change or regulate any behaviours. It's just our statutory process. The actual change is going to be unlocked when we go back to the parents, carers network and the child and start asking lots more questions and doing lots more planning. That's where we're going to facilitate the change, not necessarily through our statutory processes. And the importance of family-led planning is thinking about, because we spoke about does things happen in our time or the child and family's time, but thinking about how hard it is to change yourself, and then you'll understand what little chance you have of trying to change others. We expect just because we've asked or told parents to change that they will, and if they don't, then they're not complying. You think actually how long a cognitive shift takes, or how long change takes, or how difficult that change is, or how the dynamics within that and all the different barriers and complicating factors, and apply that to ourselves, we think actually it is very difficult to change. For those of you that have had New Year's resolutions, or for those of you that have made a firm commitment to get fit, or a firm commitment to do more sport, or a firm commitment to study a particular subject, whatever the case may be, and it doesn't happen despite your best efforts, then you start to understand that actually families in these really difficult situations and in crisis points, how difficult it can be for them to change. So we need to acknowledge and understand that change doesn't necessarily happen in our time. It will happen in the parents and the carers and in the network's time, as long as we can ensure safety and protection of the children through the skillful use of questioning and the rules that the family come up with. As long as we can ensure safety throughout this journey, then we need to give time, and this will take time sometimes, and we need to acknowledge that. So we have practice bottom lines in Cumbria, which were originally intended to be implemented on the 1st of April 2020. However, due to COVID-19, this was delayed somewhat because of the changes of how we were working in the local authority. But the bottom lines outline every new child need and child protection case must have these bottom lines, must have all these areas of practice evidence as they're coming through the service. So all cases will have genograms that are developed with the families. This is acknowledging the importance of networks, a naturally occurring network that are involved in or informed in the safety planning. We'll have danger statements, safety goals and safety scales on every case that are shared with and understood by the families. There'll be direct work with the children that links to the worries and informs planning. So we have the danger statement, the safety goal and the safety scale, but we have the direct work that is around these worries that we have, and this is going to inform the planning in the true sense of the word. The child's voice will be central to the planning and will be evident the whole way through the planning. There's a new child protection case conference agenda which emphasises on networks, so there's going to be lots of conversations for those of you that are attending child protection conferences around genograms and networks and people that can support. So rather than professional involvement and professionally imposed plan, we're going to see more family and network members at child protection conferences and much more family and network led planning. There's an expectation will also be that staff are aligning practice to the future bottom lines to be introduced 1st of March 21, and that's around timelines and safety plans. A timeline, as mentioned earlier, is the journey through a case, who will do what, where and when. So it talks about the things that need to take place on a week by week basis in order for us to achieve our safety goal, and it breaks it down so everybody's really clear, everybody's working to one timeline, everybody's working to one plan, and who knows what's going to happen where and when in terms of reaching the safety goal. And then the safety plans, the solution focused family-led rules, and about how they're created. So again, although the timelines and the safety plans aren't a bottom line at this point, they will be coming the 1st of March. We need to start thinking about and working in that way. So using timelines, giving clarity to our work, using solution focused safety planning rather than professionally imposed expectations. And this is practitioners' best advice for colleagues who've been working in this way. This is from some of our own practitioners who've been using signs of safety for some time now. And what they're saying is preparation of the questions is critical. And we'd already spoke about this around that we don't use the same script of questions with each individual family. Every individual family will have its unique set of circumstances, so we have to design questions specifically around those unique circumstances. They've said that the power of planning saves us time in the end, so they're thinking about a lot of this again is around preparation and planning, and actually front loading work actually saves us time in the long term. Involving the family's network as soon as possible. There's been a lot of practice experience about that, about the value of that, and we've seen some exceptional work that's taken place through involving networks at the earliest opportunity in Cumbria, and networks really taking ownership in cases that could have potentially escalated up into a legal context, actually have stayed at a child in need level for a period of time and then have closed with an effective safety plan that's been managed by the family in the network. We're asking questions to get other people's perspectives and a sense of the child, and the importance of slowing down our thinking. Slowing down our thinking is about us not reacting, reactive social work, seeing information, reacting to it and focusing on the worries and reacting to it. We really need to slow down our thinking and start asking lots and lots of the right questions, and start asking ourselves questions as well about possibly some of our bias and some of our thoughts and processes and how we work out information. It's all about slowing down our thinking and pausing and taking time to reflect. Are we taking the right course of action? Being clear with families and clarity and transparency and openness of communication in terms of establishing good working relationships with families, and simplifying the language and getting rid of social work jargon, and not being afraid to say to somebody, actually, can you explain what you mean by that word? And I think we've all been in those situations before where we've sat in a meeting and somebody's mentioned a phrase or a terminology that we don't know, but we've never really felt brave enough to ask what they mean, because we might feel a little bit silly, or that we're not as clever as that person, whatever the case may be. But actually, if we as professionals don't understand one another, what chance of families got of understanding us, or children got of understanding us? So it's okay to challenge some of the overcomplicated jargon and overcomplicated language that people are using, and give it a go. It is different. It is a different world, signs of safety. There is a big culture shift, but it is about just giving it a go. We can't get this wrong, because what we do is go back and reflect on the effectiveness of what we've done using this appreciative inquiry type format as mentioned, but actually just going in and giving it a go, and hopefully you've picked up lots of things in this briefing that will give you some ideas and ways to start planning work and thinking about different conversations you can have and a different mindset when approaching work, etc, etc. But it is about giving it a go, and I think in Cumbria, in the local authority, everyone's give it a go now, if you like, and we're actually getting to a place now where we've give it a go, we've understood the value of it, we've understood the benefit of it. Children and families have experienced themselves the benefit of working in this way, and we're really now trying to get this consistency of high quality practice right the way through the authority. So moving forward, just thinking about what your key learning is from what you've heard in this presentation today, and what one thing is that you'll do differently in your work. So this presentation will be uploaded to the CSCP website, so you can refer back to it and dip in and out of it as you wish, and you may like to go on and do some practice and kind of try out some of the things that you've heard today, and then refer back to the presentation at a later date. But it's thinking about, however small, what's the one key learning that you've had today, and what's one thing that you're going to do differently in your own practice that will fit much more into the signs of safety practice methodology and the principles within that. And there's my contact details there, and my email address. So if anybody has any further questions or wants to discuss anything about what they've heard or wants any more information, please do feel free to email me on my Cumbria email address there, and I'll be happy to kind of go over anything or have discussions about anything that you like to talk about some more. If I don't have the answer, we are connected to the Signs of Safety National Consultant, so I can go ahead and speak to them if need be, if we need some more clarity about a particular issue that I can't answer. But I'm sure there's lots of resources and text that we already have in Cumbria that I can point you towards if needed. Thank you for listening to this presentation.